about our 5th yoga board in the 8 limbs of yoga series. And this is a very interesting limb of yoga because I feel like this is one of the ones that a lot of people aren't aware of, that we don't talk about as much in yoga class because it's a little bit difficult to pull this into your yoga practice. But we're going to talk about some ways that you can actually do that. The concept that we're talking about today is pratyahara. And pratyahara is usually translated as something to the effect of sense withdrawal. It's about pulling away from the input that we get from our senses. So we can think about all the information that you're getting through your sense of sight, especially right now you're watching a video. You're getting a lot of information in through your sense of hearing, being able to hear my voice, and your sense of touch probably isn't a major focus for you right now, but we're always getting a little bit of information about feeling our clothing on our skin or anything that you can feel touching your body, or even just the temperature of the air around you is information that you're taking in. It might not be at the forefront of your attention at that moment, but we're always drawing that information in. Anything that you can smell in the room, and in yoga sometimes we'll burn incense or we'll have candles, so you're getting some sensory input from that. And taste is probably the one that we use the least often in yoga, but every once in a while you'll have like a yoga and chocolate or yoga and wine class where you might actually draw in the sense of taste. But we're actually kind of coming at this from the opposite angle than we normally do. So normally when we're talking about mindfulness, we're trying to take our awareness and mindfully focus on just one sense at a time. So you might focus on what you can see right now. And you're looking at it from a perspective of just kind of noticing the shapes, noticing the colors, the textures, without trying to put any sort of labeling or judgment on it. You're just taking in that sensory information. You can do the same sort of thing with sound, focusing all of your awareness on your sense of hearing. And you might be able to hear the spring peepers in the background that are down by the lake peeping. So that's something that I could focus my hearing on if I was trying to concentrate. But this is coming from a place of actually doing the opposite. It's like the opposite of mindfulness. So instead of intently focusing our senses or focusing our attention onto one sense at a time, we are trying to take our attention and take our awareness away from our senses, because the senses are what gives us information about the external world. It's about everything that's outside of ourselves. And sometimes when we're very focused on that, we lose the awareness of our internal state, of what's going on internally, which is a whole separate world. And the longer that you practice yoga, I think the more you come to understand that your internal world is just as rich and interesting and diverse as the things that are going on outside of you, especially when you hone your attention and you're really able to tune into that. So for this, it's a process of figuring out where we want to direct our energy. And a lot of what we're doing through all the different limbs of yoga is we're learning control, especially as we get into the 6th and 7th limb. You're going to see a lot of control, specifically being able to direct your energy and your attention where you want it to go rather than where your brain wants to go when it jumps around from place to place. But I think pratyahara is such a hugely important component in our practice that we really can't skip over, because you'll hear over and over, and you might experience this yourself, that people are always saying that they feel tired, that they don't have enough energy, that they feel frazzled, they feel like they are dispersed. They're always being pulled in 10 different directions, and they can't settle. Maybe the experience of the mind being really busy and just jumping around. A lot of times if you're on the computer and maybe you're on the internet, you'll see something and you'll click on it, and then you'll see something else and you click on that, and you're kind of 10 pages away from where you actually intended to be, because our energy just got pulled in all of these different directions. So that's what happens when there's a lot of external sensory input. Our attention and our energy can be pulled in any number of different directions, and that happens constantly throughout the day. If you think about what it's like when you're driving and you're listening to the radio and you're drinking your coffee, there's all of these things that your energy is going toward. And this kind of brings us back to one of the concepts that we've talked about before, where instead of multitasking, you're trying to monotask. You're trying to do one task at a time with full and complete attention. But this even goes a step farther, where you're not even so much focused on that one task as you're trying to move beyond what that task is for internal focus. It's a broader concept than monotasking. With monotasking, there's still a lot of outward energy, but it's a focused outward energy. So you can see how during the day there's kind of this process where we're bombarded by constant sensory input. Your phone is making noises, the TV is on, and the way that media is constructed, it's a constantly changing topic. There's a lot of bright lights, colors, changing scenes, so that our attention is constantly fixed on it, and it draws us in. But the problem is that process of constant sensory input, of hearing things, of seeing things, of always trying to process. Our brain is constantly taking in that information, processing it, and then trying to figure out what we're supposed to do with it. And that's an exhausting process. So I'd like to think of Pratyahara as kind of being related to Brahmacharya. If you think back to when we were talking about the yamas and the niyamas, and Brahmacharya is this concept of, sometimes it's translated as celibacy, but I prefer the idea of energy continence, right? Of being able to contain your energy within yourself and directing your energy out toward things that you want to use it for, rather than having your external environment or the demands on you draining and constantly pulling your energy away from you without your control over it. So Brahmacharya is kind of a similar aspect, but Pratyahara goes to a really deep level where we're trying to take all of the energy away from those external senses, pull them into our internal environment, and focus completely on keeping that energy around the central channel. So think about the line of the Sushumna, the central energy channel in our body, and it's the line where we can find all of the chakras. So all of the different types of energy that we have, uplifting energy, down-regulating energy, different emotions, things that are shifting and changing in our body, having complete and total awareness of those things, which is something that very few people have. Because we're so trained to put our energy outside of ourselves, to put our attention outside of ourselves, when we do have a feeling, a thought, an emotion, a shift in energy, a lot of times we ignore that or we push it aside because it might distract us from something externally that we're doing. A lot of times this is the situation if you are at work, or if you're handling something with your family, if you're trying to do some kind of task and you start to have a certain feeling, you will push that feeling away and say, nope, right now I have to focus on this. I can't be distracted by that feeling of loneliness or sadness or whatever it might be that comes up. A lot of times we'll push it down and try to ignore it and focus our energy outside of ourselves, because that is almost a more tangible way to run your day. When we start to turn inward, it can be a rather difficult process, especially when those more challenging emotions are coming up. If you do have something like loneliness or sadness that's coming up, it's not the easiest thing to sit there and be aware of it without that immediate knee-jerk reaction of trying to distract yourself. Because that's what we do very frequently. When something uncomfortable rises up and we notice it, our first reaction is distract myself. Can I turn the TV on? Can I pick up this book? Can I go call somebody? Let me push that away and go into the external environment where things are a lot more concrete and I can constantly change the stimulation so that I don't get bored and then I don't have to think about that feeling of loneliness that might come up or sadness that might come up. So in that process of constantly pushing that away, we lose our skill of being able to read that information. When we ignore feelings like that, they tend to grow stronger and they'll start to find other ways to manifest into our world or even into our physical body because they have to be expressed in some way. If they're being completely ignored, they're going to find another outlet. So the practice of Pratyahara is going to give us the space of training ourselves to look in, to see what's in there. It's almost like taking your senses and instead of directing them out, flipping them around and turning them in. Closing your eyes and visualizing yourself just as you're sitting here, but feeling that vision from an internal space. Especially if you're in a yoga pose, when you're in that pose, try to close your eyes and imagine yourself in that pose or visualize yourself in that pose. What does it look like from inside? Taking that sense of hearing, and rather than listening to what's going on around you in your yoga class, sometimes the music can be very helpful. It can be something that grounds you when your brain gets distracted. But as you get more advanced in your practice, try to take your attention away from that external sound and listen to the internal sound of your thought process, what thoughts are coming up, or listen to the internal sound of your breath. The breath work that I do for Pratyahara is kind of a classic breath work for this practice, but I think it really drives that point home of listening to your breath internally. And it's the Brahmari breath. It's usually called the Hummingbird breath, but it's a process of closing off the flaps of the ears. And we usually do a mudra across the face to gently close the eyes, to keep the mouth closed, so that all of our sensory information is restricted through the face. And then breathing, but when the flaps of the ears are closed, you have this totally different experience of the breath. You can do just a regular ujjayi breath, an ocean sounding breath, where you'll hear that inside the throat, or you can do the classic Brahmari, which is a humming breath, where you're inhaling, and then as you exhale, you hum to create a strong vibration through the throat like this. When you have the flaps of the ears closed, it's really quite a loud sound internally, but it connects you so strongly to the vibration that comes from your throat, from the way that you breathe, and also from the words and the sounds that come from our throat. The humming sound, that M sound, is really a magnified version of that, but everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm saying when I'm chanting, when I'm speaking, when I'm singing, all has a vibration that travels especially around the throat, the heart, the shoulders, this whole space in my body, into the face. That vibration is all felt in that space. But this would be an internal experience of that sound and of that vibration. So with smell, like I was saying before, a lot of times in yoga class we'll burn incense or light candles, and it's a way to trigger your nervous system to move into a rest and digest response. We're trying to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system to activate, because a lot of the times during the day you're in that fight or flight response, you're overactivated, you're upregulated. So when we come into yoga class to balance ourselves out, we're usually looking for down regulation. Not always. Sometimes we need to upregulate, but most of the time smelling the candles or smelling the incense is going to tell yourself, okay, this is yoga practice. I'm here to slow my breath down. I'm here to move mindfully. I'm here to turn my energy and my attention inward. So your body's already going to start that process as soon as you get that smell. But it's trying to get to a point where you can use that smell to anchor yourself in the beginning, but then instead of focusing on it completely, pull your energy away from that and draw your energy to a deeper level so that you can do some of that internal awareness. With touch, it's the same kind of thing. Initially, when you first come into your poses, you might be aware of where you're leaning on your props, where your skin is touching your mat, or where your clothing is touching your skin. If it's a hot yoga class, the feeling of the heat against your skin, all of those things. But try not to stop at that level. Try to draw it back a little bit farther, pull the energy in, try to get to an internal sense of feeling that pose. When the eyes are closed especially, and you're in a pose where you feel steady, sometimes it's hard to close your eyes because you're using your vision for balance. You might need an external drishti point to keep yourself balanced. But if you're able to close your eyes, visualize yourself in that pose, notice what your energy feels like, notice what your breathing feels like, see if you can visualize your breath coming and going. And then instead of just stopping with the superficial feeling of the pose, see if you can pull that awareness down into a deeper layer of your muscles, to your organs, really down into the core of your body. What does the pose feel like from that space? And then taste, maybe. There might be some elements of being able to taste. I've gone to meditation practices where we did a mindful eating practice with a strawberry. So you never know if that's something that might pull you into your practice. Or maybe you just spit out your gum right before you walked into the yoga room and you still have that minty sensation in your mouth. Something like that might come into play, but you want to make sure that your energy doesn't get pulled toward that and fixated on it. You can use it initially as an anchor, but don't let yourself stop there. Try to go down into that deeper layer. Pull your awareness and your attention away from that sense of taste and bring it deeper into whatever pose, whatever breath, whatever mudra you're practicing at that moment. So you can see this, it's this whole concept where we're trying to have a handle on our relationship between the external world, the external environment, and the internal world. Sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and our breath are the two things that are interfacing internal and external environment. Those are our tools. We can anchor our awareness to them and then try to draw our awareness deeper. So when we get really good at this, then we can be in environments that are busy, that are trying to pull our senses and pull our energy out away from us. But when we're really skilled at Pratyahara, we're going to be able to draw that back so that we won't be overwhelmed as easily. We won't get to that space where we feel fragmented or frazzled as easily because we have better control over where our energy goes, right? From that combination of Pratyahara and Brahmacharya. I feel like they really go well together. And you can think of it like our friend the turtle here. So the turtle normally has arms and legs out, head out, he's walking around, interacting with the external world, and then gets to a point where he starts to feel fatigued and he can pop the arms and legs and head back into the shell, drawing his energy internally for that period of rest. So this is something that we're going to see during our Hatha yoga practice when we do a pose like child's pose. So I love going into child's pose, resting my head against the mat, drawing my arms really close to my body, feeling like everything is pulled in energetically. I'm really tucked into this little, sometimes we'll call it like a seed shape. You're pulling yourself into a little pod. And your eyes are closed. You don't have a whole lot of external information coming in because your eyes and your head are down toward the mat. So you have this very strong anchoring to your breath and to your internal state at that moment. The other place where we can practice this is during really any forward bend. Forward bends always have that kind of inward movement to them, which is really nice. But I love to use props like an eye pillow, especially during Shavasana at the end of your practice. Close the eyes and cover them so that you're not getting any light information. That's going to help to down-regulate your nervous system. But anytime during your practice that you can close your eyes is going to be really helpful. So I know depending on what kind of yoga you practice or what kind of studio you practice in, there are all different setups. But a lot of times I find when there's a mirror, it can be helpful for working on alignment and body awareness, especially if you don't have strong proprioception. So proprioception is our inner sense of knowing where our body is in space without having to look at it or feel where it is. You just know. So if I lift my arm up and I close my eyes, I can tell where my hand is in space. Or if I bring it down, I know exactly where my arm is without having to look at it. Some people don't have a good sense of body awareness, so they might not be able to tell exactly where their arm is. Is my elbow higher than my shoulder? Is my elbow lower than my shoulder? It's one of those kind of little things that makes it a little bit more difficult to find proper alignment without seeing yourself visually. So if proprioception is an issue, sometimes using a mirror can be really helpful to actually see, okay, my shoulders are square, my hips are square, or if they're not, how to bring them back into balance. But barring an issue with that, saying that you have pretty average awareness of where your body is in space, when you're closing your eyes, then you're letting go of this whole myriad of things that can bombard you in your practice if you're looking at a mirror. So things are going to come up, like judging what your hair looks like. Why did I wear that outfit? I need to lose 5 pounds. Like any of these things, you might look in the mirror and these are thoughts that are just going to jump into your head without really even trying to go in that direction. So I think taking away that external input of seeing yourself saves a lot of that kind of distraction, because our practice is really supposed to be a break from all of that kind of stuff. It's supposed to be a break from constantly having to judge and analyze everything, of feeling like you're not good enough or feeling like your pose isn't right, having that kind of insecurity or self-doubt. We have enough of that during the rest of our day. So our practice is really something that we want to create to be like a safe haven, that when you're on your mat, you're moving and you're breathing and you're enjoying that process and you're just being you, whatever you are right now, and letting go of that other stuff, that self-doubt and that self-deprecating kind of internal dialogue. But it gets very tricky when you have to use some sort of external visual input. Keep that in mind though. If you do have mirrors in your studio, just watch for that process. If it happens, just notice it happening. Try not to fixate on the thought, let the thought go. Maybe replace it with something else if you need to. You can stick a mantra in there if you feel like you need a tool to anchor you. But try to think about different ways that you can work this into your practice of drawing yourself in. Not being so focused on what your pose looks like. If it's like a pose that you're going to take a picture of and post on Instagram or something like that, that's not where the growth and the internal transformation of your practice is going to happen. It's when you really start to institute and draw in Pratyahara and Brahmacharya, awareness of what's going on internally. Because when we have a healthier internal state, when we're more aware of what our body is trying to tell us, what our emotions are, what our energetic state is, everything else in your life is going to fall into place once you have that internal state where it needs to be. Rather than fixating on what your external life looks like, which seems easier, it seems more tangible, and in a way it probably is easier, but you won't get the results that you're looking for if all of your energy is dispersed outside of yourself. So try to find little times during the day where you can draw in, where you can use Pratyahara on your mat and off your mat to direct where you want your energy to go. And notice how that transforms your connection with yourself, your relationship with yourself. And we're going to use this concept of Pratyahara as we go into the next 3 of the limbs of yoga. It becomes very, very important. So thank you for watching and talking about this very important part of the 8 limbs of yoga. I hope you can join me for the remaining boards. Thank you so much. Namaste.